first section includes the introductory sequences to 2 essays. Now then, when we're marking, we look for a number of characteristics in your work. I'm not saying that this would apply necessarily to a reflective portfolio, but it certainly does to an international relations or security studies type of essay. I think in many respects this is relevant to history essays as well. So there are 9 characteristics here, as you can see in front of you. There's a list that begins with 1 and 2, and 1 and 2 relate to structure and organisation. 3 is analysis, 4 is content, 5 is evidencing, 6 is referencing, 7 is definitions and addressing them, 8 is answering the question, and 9 is advancing an argument. And the idea is basically that I think in each one you can see there's a more sort of an elaborate explanation, with the exception of number 1. There's a more elaborate explanation as to what each characteristic is representative of. So if you look at number 2, organisation, for example, you can see that that section of the essay, usually at the beginning of the essay, somewhere in the introductory sequence, tells the reader what to expect, as it were. Simply, that's the function of what an introduction is all about. So, and I think there's a very simple way to do this, as we'll see from the first essay, which I've got below. So I've included an introduction to 2 essays. One is a very simple one, undergrad one, and then the second one, the other one, is a more complex essay that's been produced by a Fulbright scholar. And the idea is that we look at both of these essays. Only the introduction has been provided for you with both of these essays. The idea is that we look at these essays and we find these 9 characteristics. Okay, so when we go, and I'll just do one, as if there's a few more points there, A, B, and C. Read those; they're relevant to the discussion and debate. But if we go back to the beginning and look for structure and organisation, number 1 and number 2 on the list, we can see that if we look carefully at this essay, we can see that the author of this essay starts to explain what's going to happen in the essay and when. In other words, this is an explanation of what structure and organisation of the essay is. And you can see from this, it says first the essay will first examine the justification for this essay is about humanitarian intervention, and so on and so forth. So when we look a little bit further, we can also see that the structure and organisation of the essay is being spelled out, because they've got a section there that says second, this will happen; third, this will happen; fourth, this will happen; and finally, this will happen. So you're familiar with this already, by now. So maybe we don't need to sort of labour the point too much. But this is this criteria; these characteristics are important because this is what we look for when we're marking essays. And if you don't have a sufficient explanation of your structure and organisation, for example, or you don't address definitions, for example, and you can see that this student has there's a reference to definitions up there, then that can be a problem in terms of the comments that you get when your dissertation is marked. So my argument is that this is a bit of a shopping list approach to the idea of writing an essay, number 1, and number 2, a dissertation. But I think it's really important that you are aware that these sort of characteristics exist. They do map onto the university's official marking scheme, the institutional grading criteria. These do map onto the institutional grading criteria. The grading criteria, however, is for social and political sciences, but also for optometry and chemistry and so on and so forth. So it's a more sort of generic explanation. So when we've done this very simple exercise where we look at the 9 characteristics and we find them in this very simple, straightforward and quite short introduction to an essay, we then move on to the next section. There's a box here, of course, that you can use to comment on the dissertation. The idea is that you become a marker of the dissertation, as it were, and you also, in addition to finding those characteristics, you comment on what you think is good and bad about the essay, so on and so forth. So the idea is that you do exactly the same with this essay: is globalization leading to a more peaceful world? And then exactly the same exercise, in the sense that this is a 4,000-word essay. It's written by a Fulbright scholar. It looks, on first reading, quite daunting, but I would argue that if you are not fazed by the sort of length of the introduction, if you focus on looking for those 9 characteristics that I've identified above, then you will see that these characteristics are present in this introduction. Now, this introduction, because this essay is quite long, the introduction is about 3.5 pages in length, but with reference to the issue of structure and organisation, if I go through this introductory sequence, I can find that when I get to page 3, that I start to see evidence that the author does exactly what the student who wrote the essay above has done, in the sense that they identify, for the benefit of the reader, what the structure and organisation of the essay is. And it says, in the first section I do this, blah, blah, blah. And then the author then goes on to say, in the second and third sections I do A, B and C. I present the systematic alternatives, blah, blah, blah. And you can see quite clearly that those two characteristics are present in this introduction. And it's a slightly more complex approach, but essentially that is what is going on. We can see the characteristics number 1 and number 2, structure and organisation, in this introductory sequence to this Fulbright Scholars essay. We can also, I would argue, find evidence of all of the other characteristics to do in particular with definitions, which is a very significant issue in this essay. It would be really good to have a discussion about what the author actually does, but also you can see that the author adopts a very specific line of argumentation in this essay, and they not only do that, they do that in a very specific way by borrowing an idea that has been from the discourse, from the literature, from an author, if you like, and we can talk about whether or not this is a sort of an example of good practice. So the idea then is that you go, the essay in earnest does not start until this subheading. This is 3.5 pages in to a 4,000 word essay. So the introduction to this essay is about 2, maybe 3 pages in length, and then the essay actually starts there. So the object of the exercise, therefore, is that we apply those 9 characteristics to the first essay and to the second essay. Okay, so just to finish this video off, this is we're back to the easy essay, short essay by an undergrad student, and as you can see, well, this whole thing's sort of highlighted in blue, so I've taken the highlight off it, and as we've previously discussed, this is in a slightly different format, so it might be confusing in this connection. But anyway, let me just see if we can get this to make sense. The question then is basically the first sentence. When is it justified? Obviously, we need to be able to satisfy ourselves that the student is asking the question. That's one of the criteria, one of the 9 criteria. But we'll move on from that. We can go through, and we've done this before. We can find the definitions. And if I just go to this section and highlight the definitions, we can go through and we can see various examples of good practice, in the sense that the students borrowed a definition from Woodhouse and Ramsbottom, although they're not properly evidenced. That it should be in brackets here, should be 1992, open and close brackets, in accordance with the Harvard system. So that's okay. This essay will argue, then we found the argument. So that's 3 or 4 things we found already. We've found the structure and the organisation. This essay will first examine. The second it will examine this. Third, it will do something else. Fourth, it will do something else. Finally, it will summarise the argumentation in the conclusion, and so on, and so forth. So we've been through that, and that seems to me all to be fine. Just to make the point slightly further about these criteria we're finding, we maybe not found them all in this one, but these are signposts. So if we go to the signposts, you can see that I've sort of taken the box away from around this, and what I've done in the next slide, which you'll see, is I've removed the narrative. And so all of this stuff that you can see where it says at the beginning, after the question, it says, in questioning whether blah blah blah, and the narrative that relates to the definition and what Ramsbottom and Woodhouse do, and the actual argument, which was basically that we have common humanity and a moral duty to protect people and provide humanitarian assistance, and all of the information, as it were, about humanitarian intervention. I've removed all of that, and so what we're left with is only signposts. So that looks like this. So when I remove the narrative, as you can see here, it says as follows. When I remove the narrative, so in a way I've just kept the signposts and I've deleted the words. of the narrative. So when I remove the narrative from the first essay, this just the short one, not done the other one, we're left with the following signposts. And the following signposts are the definitions, which appear here as highlighted, and then in terms of the definition and the evidencing, we see this Woodhouse Ramsbottom, and this relates, the first one relates to number 7 definitions, the second one relates to 5 evidencing, 6 referencing, and 7 definitions. The argument, the essay will argue, that relates to criteria 9 or characteristic 9. The essay will first examine, obviously this is about criteria 1 and 2, structure and organisation, and at first it does something according to the author, second it does something else, third it does something else, fourth it does something else, and so you see how it all works. Finally, the argument summarising the conclusion. This is 1, 2 and 8 in the sense that 1 and 2 relate to structure and organisation, and 8 relates to argumentation. And so in terms of finding the 9 characteristics, we found 1, 2, 5, 6, 7 and 9 in the above, in the exercise above. In terms of ones that are missing, 3, which is missing, usually appears in the body of the literature, so that's analysis. 4 is content, and that's more apparent in the Fulbright Scholars essay. It's much easier to see the scope, the breadth of the content that's been addressed in the Fulbright Scholars. In the simple essay, it's much more sparse, and you can't really get a grasp of how well the student knows the subject. But in the Fulbright Scholars one, you can definitely, because of Fukuyama and Rogerson Gray and Mary Kaldor and Bhagwati and all of the other authors that are mentioned, that there may be 10 of those in total. So in terms of ones we found 1, 2, 5, 6, 7 and 9. 3 usually appears in the body of the essay, and we've only got the introductions. 4 relating to content is easier to see in the Fulbright Scholars, but 7 and 3 are also appearing in the Fulbright Scholars as well. In other words, 7 dealing with definitions, which is the first 2 pages, and number 3, analysis. I think it's quite clear that student seems to be very familiar with the subject and is able to present even the introduction and has analysis in it. And then number 8, which is the final one that we've not seen so far, 8 of the 9, is also usually appears in the body, in the sense that number 8 is easier to see in the Fulbright Scholars essay more than it is in the short essay. So what we've done there is basically we've taken the introduction to the easy essay, the short one, the undergrad one. We've identified the signposts as I've just illustrated to you, and then we've deleted the narrative, and what we're left with is that, which in inverted commas you can see relates to number 7, number 6, number 7, number 9, number 1, number 2, number 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So we found 1, 2, 5, 6, 7 and 9. 3 usually it's in the body. 4 is apparent in the Fulbright essay alongside definitions and analysis, and 8 also appears in the body as well. So you get the general idea. In a way, the take-home message with this is that when you do your introduction, it should include all of the things that we see on this page that appear in inverted commas, definitions, Woodhouse and Ramsbottom, the essay will argue, all of those things, they should all be in your introduction. That's what I'm saying. So that's why we do this, and we look at the Fulbright one, the very hard one, because just to make the point that exactly the same approach has been adopted in the Fulbright Scholars essay, and there are lots of examples in both the easy one and the hard one of examples of good practice, scholarly academic practice, and so I hope that is helpful to you all in deciding what you should include in your introduction. And of course, the main message with this is that these are the things, broadly speaking, that we look for when we mark. If we don't see definitions, if we don't see an argument, if we don't see analysis, structure, organisation, if we don't see that the student has addressed definitions, etc., etc.,
that can be a problem because when we mark, if we don't see argument, we basically cannot award a mark for argumentation, which is part of the institution's grading criteria, insofar as it's been mapped onto the 9 criteria that we've developed in the political sciences. So I hope you find that useful.